Animation Blueprint, the file that controls how your character moves in Unreal Engine. And in this video I'll show you exactly how to set it up in the right way. And yes, even if you've never touched animations before, this video is still for you. So let's get started. There are two types of meshes in Unreal Engine. Static meshes, which you've likely seen already, and skeletal meshes, which have bones that can move to create different poses, like a real body. So the animation blueprint is basically the character's brain. It receives information from the character, like if it's walking. If it is, it makes the character visually walk. In the editor, a default animation blueprint is already set up if you chose for a first or third person template when creating your project. You can see this by going to your character blueprint, and in the details panel you'll see the animation blueprint it's using. Let's remove it and see what happens. When we now hit play, the character just stands still because we removed its brain. It can walk, but it does not know about any animation or when to switch. For this tutorial, I've downloaded a character and some animations from Mixamo. You can grab the same files via the link in the description if you want to follow along. I've imported the animations and the character's skeletal mesh, as you can see, and now it's time to make our own animation blueprint. We do that by right-clicking, and under animation you find animation blueprint. Here we choose the skeleton that we just imported, create and give it a name. And now technically, since we have an animation blueprint, we could already hook this up to our player blueprint. In our character blueprint, make sure you select the root, and in skeletal mesh we can now change this to our skeletal mesh. And then here under the animation blueprint, under the anim class, we'll get the animation blueprint that we just created. And now when you play, you see the character, you can see it moves, but well, it has no animations whatsoever. And this is because the animation blueprint is empty, meaning our character's brain is also empty. When opening the animation blueprint, you will be thrown into the animation graph. I'm gonna just duck this into my main window. And you see there's one node placed by default, the output pose. And this is basically your end result. Any animation that you hook into this node will play. If we, for example, go to our asset browser and get our walking animation, drag it in, hook it up, compile, save, and we play, and well, you can see it walked for a bit, but I also noticed the animation is currently not looping, so let's set it to looping. We can easily make it loop by selecting the animation, and then in the details panel, search for loop animation, compile, and now you see it will always walk. When we test it in game, you'll see we are walking, but it doesn't do anything else. We can jump, we can walk fast, we can stand still, and it will always just do the walking animation. But we want multiple animations to work and blend between them based on rules, like are we jumping, are we running, are we swimming, are we falling, etc. And for this we need a state machine. So back in our animation blueprint, we right click and search for state machine, and it's just this one, the top one. And we're gonna hook this up into the result. We can remove this. And a state machine is basically a spider web of states your character can be in. And each state plays a specific animation, like idle, walking, or jumping. You can connect these states using arrows, which will change the animation that's playing. These arrows have a rule assigned, an output boolean that can be either true or false. To set up these rules, like knowing if the character is walking or not, we need information from our character. And we collect this information in the event graph. Like event tick in regular blueprints, event blueprint update animation runs every frame. Here we want to update information like the player's velocity, if it's falling, if it's jumping, etc. We also have an initialize animation event, which isn't there by default, but we can add it. Just search for initialize, there you go. And this is basically your event begin play, as you might know it from blueprints. So first we're going to cast to the player character. So from the try get pawn owner, which is there by default as well, cast to whatever your character is called, BP third person character. And this lets us access the character's variables like movement speed or whether it's in the air or not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a reference out of this, go with character ref. I'm also gonna get a reference of the movement component, which by default is called get character movement, I think. If you scroll down, there you go, and just promote this to a variable. And this character movement component, if we go back to our player character, we have this character movement component, and it contains a lot of variables that we can access from the animation blueprint. For example, if you scroll down a bit, you'll see the velocity, and we're going to use that to change between idle, walk, and running based on how fast we're walking, which is in this velocity. So in our animation blueprint, we want to constantly update our velocity. We want to see on every frame what is our velocity of the character. So out of our movement component, let's drag it in. We want to get the velocity. Scroll down a bit, it should be a vector. But we don't want this to be a vector, we want this to be a float, just a singular number. So what we can actually do is get vector length. There you go, vector length. And I'm gonna go for the vector length XY. This will just look at ground movement and not if it's going up or down. We don't care if it's going up or down, we just want to see if it's going front, back, or sideways. And then we're gonna store this into a variable. Promote the variable, we call this velocity. So whenever we are walking, this number will increase, and whenever we're running or sprinting, this number will increase as well, and when we stand still, it's 0. So every frame, our velocity float value is set. Awesome. We also want to get the isFalling boolean from the movement component, which will just check if the player is in the air. Let's also make this a variable called isFalling. Hook it up here. And lastly, we need a variable for if the character is jumping or not. But as you can see, there is no such function for it in the movement component. So let's create one ourselves. In our character blueprint, scroll down a bit until you see the jump. Let's create a new variable called is jumping, and when the character jumps, we just simply set it to true. Then after half a second delay of 0.5 seconds, we're gonna tell, hey, you're not jumping anymore. We set it to, I'm gonna set it to false. Make sure that this one is set to true. So we jump, boolean is set to true. Half a second later, it's gonna be set to false again. That's how we check if we are jumping or not. Now from the character ref that we created earlier, we can now just get is jumping. And you can see, there you go. Get is jumping. We also want to set that as a variable. So to recap, we have just set up some variables that we're going to use for our animations. We are checking on every frame what our velocity is, whether we are falling, so if we're in the air, and if we are jumping, if we just jumped. Now we have our rules. Let's set up our states. We do that in our state machine. So let's open it. And we have a couple of states. We have idle, walking, running, jumping, and falling. So you can just right click and say add state. And I'm gonna assign idle, walking, and running all to one state, and jumping and falling to individual states. And I'll show why in a bit. So the first one is gonna be idle / walking / jump or / running. And then we have a state called jumping. And lastly, we have a state called falling. All right, and by default, we want the character to be in an idle state. So from entry, we hook up this arrow to idle. There you go. Now from idle, we can either jump or we can go into falling mode. From jumping, we can go back into idle, walking, or running. Or we can go into falling. And from falling, we can not go back into jumping, but we can go back into idle, walking, or running. Now let's set up our jumping and falling first. It's the most straightforward. Just double click on one of the states. This is gonna be the jumping animation. So just drag it in, hook it up. Same counts for falling. Double click, drag it in, hook it up. And for the idle, walking, running, we need to somehow blend between animations based on the character's velocity. And the powerful way to do that is by using a blend space. It will check our player's velocity and change the animation or blend between animations based on the float value that we set here. So to make a blend space, open up your content drawer, right click, animations, and here you have blend space. Make sure to set it to our skeleton. We call this BS for blend space _ idle walk run. Open it and let's dock this into our main window again. And here you have basically two axes, which we can define ourselves on the left. Here we can give both axes a name, but we're just going to use the horizontal axis, so you don't have to worry about the vertical axis for this tutorial. Let's call the horizontal axis velocity, and let's set the maximum axis value to 600. 600 is the max speed that I want to give my character. And now we can drag in our animations again. So starting with idle. So it's going to be idle when it's on 0. Then we want it to walk when it's 500 actually. And finally we have our running, which will have velocity 600, and that's all. You can control and click, where you can see the character actually blending between the animations. So here it's running, slowing down to walking, slowing down to idle. If you're curious about the vertical axis of the blend space, by the way, it can be used for a lot of things, but one example is to set a direction. For example, if the player is walking to the left, a strafing left animation would be playing, and the other axis would still be the velocity. So let's go back to our character blueprint and make sure that our walking speed is actually 500. And here, character movement component, let's search for max walk speed. Max walk speed is actually already set to 500. And I've made some very basic code for sprinting. So when you press shift, you will go to 600 max walking speed, which is the maximum we can get. So here it's running. And then when you release it, it will go back to 500. So we're gonna walk again. So back in the animation blueprint, let's double click on our idle, walk, run. And here you can see the blend space is already added into our asset browser by default. So let's drag it in, let's hook it up. And now you will see it ask for a velocity, and well, that's great because we have a velocity variable. So we get it, and you can just leave this one empty. This is for the vertical axis, and as I mentioned, we're not using that for this tutorial. Now the last thing we have to do is telling the animation blueprint when to transition to the jumping and falling states. You can actually see it here, it will never be taken, please connect something to can enter transition. We do that by using these little buttons, and these are called transition rules. So for this line, we just open it, and here we just want to check if we're jumping or not. So we have this is jumping here, get is jumping, and only when we're jumping, we can enter the transition. And oppositely, if we go back into our state machine, in this direction, we want to check, hey, is it not jumping? So just get is jumping, we use the not boolean, and then plug it in. You can also just click on the rule and go to the details panel, and you see this checkbox. This will automatically make a rule based on the rule that we set here. So here we are saying, hey, only go to this animation when it's jumping, and here we can just take this checkbox, and now it recognizes that this one will only trigger when it's jumping, and now this will only trigger when it's not jumping. So it just inverts the rule. It's basically a shortcut instead of having to make your own code for it like this. And you can see it actually has a warning, and you can see it here. It has an automatic rule-based transition that will override the graph exit rule. So this will not work right now because we set the checkbox here. So for this rule, we only want to go from jumping to falling when we're not jumping anymore, but we are falling. So we're gonna get our is jumping, and only when we're not jumping, but we are falling, we can use the and boolean. Only when these conditions are true, so when we're not jumping, but we are falling, we can transition from jumping into falling. Because remember, we set this variable in our character blueprint, we press space, we jump, this boolean will be activated or be true, then after half a second it will be deactivated. And then we want to enter our idle, walk, run when we're not falling anymore, so when we're on the ground. So we just get our is falling boolean. Again, if we're not falling, then we want this rule to be activated. And lastly, we have one more warning, which is for this rule. This is when we go from ground movement to falling. We want to get our falling. When we're falling, we can enter this state. And that should be it. So this is our state machine. We have our ground movement. It can go into jumping. It can go into falling. Let's test it. You'll see we are in our idle state. We can walk. When I press shift, we go into running. I can go back. But when we jump, you'll notice it instantly goes into the falling animation instead of the jump animation. And when we take a look at the state machine, we see we just set up a rule that goes into falling when we're falling. But when we jump, we are also technically falling because we're in the air. So we want to give priority to this lane instead of this one. And to do that, you just simply click on the rule and we're gonna give it priority order 2. Let's try it out. We can jump, there we go, and it will go instantly into its falling animation. And there you go. And congrats, your character now responds to input with fully working animations. That should give you a solid foundation for animation blueprints. Enough to build on and create awesome character movement that will help you make amazing games. If you're serious about making your own game, I would highly recommend this video where I guide you through the full toolkit to make a game from scratch in Unreal Engine. You can watch it by clicking on the video that's on your screen right now.